Okay, hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Denise Hartz. I'm co-chair of the corporators at Emerson Hospital, and the corporators reside in the 24 local towns, and we are elected ambassadors of Emerson, and we are committed to supporting Emerson Hospital in our community. If you'd like to learn more about being an Emerson Hospital corporator, please contact the development office at corporator@emersonhosp.org, corporator@emersonhosp.org. Tonight's discussion will be a webinar format, which means guests will have both video and audio turned off to allow for maximum screen space for our presenters and their visuals. As time allows, we will field questions at the end of the presentation. So please, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. So please type your question using that function, and when applicable, please direct your question to a certain panelist. So at this time, I would like to turn the meeting over to the president of the Auxiliary of Emerson Hospital. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Good evening. I'm Deb Van Walsum, and I'm the president of the Auxiliary of Emerson Hospital. The Auxiliary is a volunteer group committed to enhancing the patient experience at Emerson through the funding of innovative initiatives, creating handcrafted items, and offering educational opportunities such as this discussion we present with the corporators tonight. I welcome everyone to reach out to learn more or to join the Auxiliary by contacting us at emersonauxiliary@gmail.com. There are very many ways to be involved. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. I'm Jack McKean, the other co-chair of the Emerson Corporators. Tonight, in collaboration with the Auxiliary, we present a thoughtful panel discussion on the topic of loneliness. The senior population can face unique challenges, increased during this time of COVID-19 and social distancing, that contribute to loneliness. A key point is that studies have shown a correlation between loneliness and health outcomes. I am pleased to introduce tonight's panelists. Katharine Esty is a social psychologist, a practicing psychotherapist, and author of the book 80-somethings. Dr. Sunita Hanjura, primary care physician at Emerson Internal Associates in Bedford, with a special interest in geriatric medicine. Bob Pacl, a licensed social worker at Emerson Hospital who works with many aging patients. Kelsey Magnuson is the community benefits manager at Emerson Hospital, creating relationships with community organizations to promote good health. And without further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to Katharine.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and to have you all with us. I just wish we could see each other, but it is wonderful to be here. Our topic, loneliness in the aging community, is really so especially important right now in this time of pandemic and social distancing. As Jack said in his introduction, I am both a social psychologist and a practicing psychotherapist. So that gives me a couple of lenses through which to think about loneliness, our topic. I'm also a writer, and as he said, my book is called 80-somethings, a practical guide to letting go, aging well, and finding unexpected happiness. I was really interested in this book to find out what life was really like for people in their 80s. I had a hunch that it was very different from our grandparents' old age, and it was indeed what I found out from my research. And I learned a lot about both loneliness and social connections when I interviewed 128 people to write the book. I should also say, in the spirit of full disclosure, that I am 85, and so I am really part of the population we're talking about tonight. And I can also say that I have had firsthand experience with our topic, loneliness, during the last 3 months when I've been really sequestered away, and I'm missing seeing my grandchildren and my friends. So loneliness as a societal issue first came to my attention in 2018 when Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, announced that she had just named a minister of loneliness. She said, for far too many people, loneliness is a reality, sad reality of modern life. A 2017 study had found out that 9 million people in Great Britain, or about 14% of the population, reported that they were often or always lonely. And when she made this, announced this appointment, there was a flurry of articles describing an epidemic of loneliness and widespread alienation. And of course, we in America found out that we had a problem here too. It wasn't just in Great Britain. So the real question, what is loneliness? And I always say loneliness is all about feelings. It's the subjective experience of disconnection from other people. And it can include feelings of emptiness, lack of control, as well as deep yearnings for meaningful connections. Lonely people usually feel they have no relationship, which is where they're truly known or where they can be really themselves. But loneliness can happen to anyone. It can happen to young people or old, married or single, rich or poor. And it's different from being alone or being solitary. You can be alone and not lonely. Loneliness can lead to depression, as you'll hear more, I'm sure, from the other speakers. We do know that loneliness is more prevalent among older people, and it's more prevalent among people who live alone. About 28% of older adults live alone. A study done by the company Cigna in 2019 found out that more than 50% of the people in their sample, 63% of men and 58% of women, reported that they were sometimes lonely. And this was before COVID. Now I want to add some real faces to this abstract concept of loneliness. And to do that, I'm going to tell you about 4 of the people that I interviewed for my book: Orca, Vincent, Miguel, and Patty. These are not their real names, but their stories are real, and they are real people. And they all live within 15 miles of Emerson Hospital. And all of them are in their 80s. Orca lives alone in a small apartment several miles from a store. And she is a lonely person. She raised her 2 sons as a single mom while working part-time at a florist shop. Her entire income now comes from that small Social Security check. And this is how she described her life to me. I've had 2 strokes, I'm on a walker, and I have macular degeneration. I tell my sons, you have no idea what's coming down the road to you. Neither of them take any care of me, she said. One son drops off a bunch of frozen dinners every 2 weeks or so, and I warm them in the microwave. I do have cold cuts for lunch. My neighbor fixes my pills for me. I can't drive and I don't know a lot of people. So I don't have any fun. I try and call my cousin or my other friend. It's not like when I was a kid and I could run out at night and jump rope or play hopscotch with a bunch of neighborhood friends. I don't go out. I just watch TV. It's not easy. What struck me about Orca was how, despite her loneliness, she's able to get people to provide her what she needs to survive, but barely survive. She clearly yearns for more than survival and some companions. And sure, she is cranky and a complainer, but where are the support services from her town? Who's checking in on her? No one is keeping her company. Vincent, the next person, lives in a nursing home and has no resources except Medicaid. He's a small man, all skin and bones. He told me, I don't do a damn thing, and I don't know if I'm better off dead or alive. I am an old-time smoker, he said, and you can't even smoke here. The food is terrible. I don't eat any meat. I just eat potatoes and the little tangerines they have for dessert. My weight is down to nothing. My roommate is terrible too. He bangs on his chair all the time, and during the night he growls. I have 6 daughters, but some of them don't even talk to me. You never would have seen my father or mother in a place like this. I have a grandson, and he's been saying for a month that he will come and see me, but I haven't seen him. It's pretty sad. Still, Vincent has his small pleasures. He explained, bingo and a trip to the doctor is a day out of here. I smoke a cigarette in the car and I'm happy as hell. But mostly he's lonely. Like Orca, Vincent is grouchy and complaining, and like her, he's lonely. His relationships aren't working for him. We hear his pain so clearly. John Cacioppo, a researcher at University of Chicago, has identified that many lonely people are wary and fearful and ready to lash out at others. This makes it hard for people to connect with them. Now on to Miguel. He is a person who is not lonely. He's a tallish, slightly overweight man who was wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap the day I met up with him for our interview. His parents were immigrants from Portugal, and he grew up in Fall River. When he was 10, Miguel began playing the trumpet in a band with his uncles. He later became a music teacher at a high school and taught there for his whole career and retired years ago. His wife died a few years ago, and a few years after that, he married happily for the second time. He and his wife, he told me, live on an income of just $40,000 a year. But he doesn't worry about money. He said, it's steady, we know what we've got. They never go out to restaurants, but they do have friends in for dinner many times in the month. He plays in a band with his old high school buddies. And he told me, I get along with my family, and I take care of my 5-year-old granddaughter one day a week. There is a calmness in my family, and that calmness is part of what keeps me going. I don't overreact to people. I'm not competitive. I don't play to win. In fact, I like playing basketball by myself. But secretly, but he said, but the secret to my life is naps. Every day at 4:30, I take half a Valium and then take the nap. I wake up refreshed and ready for the second half of my day. Miguel is calm and collected and not lonely. Lastly, Patty. Patty has lived alone for more than 25 years since her husband left her. She told me, though, I just love being in my 80s since being alive is special. When I interviewed her at a senior center, she brought along her best friend. She explained that they've been friends for more than 40 years. They come each week to the senior center for coffee and chat, and they've gone for all those 40 years together to a weekly prayer group at her church. She tells me that the prayer group has mattered more than anything in her life. But she also loves her garden and waking up with no pressure to get things done. But she admits it hasn't been easy. She has experienced a lot of setbacks and tragedies. Her son was murdered some years ago. Her daughter-in-law died this year, and she has no grandchildren, but she's not lonely. She sees her best friend all the time, and she has her weekly prayer groups. So what are the difference then? What do we see the difference between people who are lonely and those that are not? Lonely people like Orca and Vincent are not usually closely connected to their family members, and they don't have close friends either. They rarely participate in community activities. Nobody is looking after them. In contrast, those who are not lonely are well and deeply closely connected to family and friends. Their relationships matter to them, and they work to sustain them. They also have ongoing connections to community activities and groups like Miguel's band and Patty's prayer group. And when they lose an important relationship, they are able to move on eventually and make a new relationship. When I finished my interviews, I became keenly aware how, as a society, we have largely ignored the social needs of older adults, and we vastly underestimated the impact of loneliness. It's not just a personal problem, but a community issue. Some places appear to be doing better in addressing the needs of older people than we are here in the US. Did you know that the average life expectancy in Hong Kong is 84 years compared to 79 here in the US? That's a bit shocking, isn't it? Especially because in Hong Kong, people are packed together in a crowded, polluted city. But the very high level of human contact seems to be a key factor in their longevity. They also have lots of public parks, walkways, public transportation, free healthcare. In 2015, the World Health Organization declared that age-friendly world was going to require a transformation of health systems to a more integrated care for the whole person. It will consider social, emotional, psychological, and physical and spiritual needs of older adults. AARP is working with the World Health Organization on a program where cities and towns work to get a certificate that they're age-friendly. It's interesting that Massachusetts was one of the first states, mostly it's cities and towns, but Massachusetts as a state has committed to becoming age-friendly. I'm going to finish with a question. How can we provide more of what the lonely people need so that they can flourish? It's not going to be an easy fix. The lonely people are a hard to reach group of non-joiners hidden away in our midst. But I now, especially since after my research for the book, have a wonderful vision of old age where people grow old, still well connected to others, and still having meaningful experiences of relationship to their very last days. Thank you. And I'm going to hand over the screen to Dr. Sunita Hanjura at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Katharine, for that very personal and touching portrayal of loneliness. And thank you for all your hard work and interviews for the book. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sunita Hanjura, and I'm a primary care physician with Emerson Practice Associates in Bedford. Tonight, I'll be reviewing the health effects of loneliness. We all understand that human beings are social animals, and the social distancing that we have had to do during the pandemic has been difficult for this reason. We have the innate desire for participation in community and the desire to connect with others. However, increasingly, many Americans are lonely, just like the Beatles song. How common is loneliness? A large study by the Kaiser Family Foundation determined that it affects 22% of adults in the United States. And in older adults, as Katharine said, it's more prevalent and affects about 43% of those over 60. In recognizing that loneliness is a problem in our society, we have to understand that our emotional health is as important to our well-being as our physical health, and the two are intertwined. Loneliness has recently been recognized as an invisible crisis in healthcare. In 2017, the former Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, called it a public health epidemic. And in his new book, Together, he addressed the scope of the problem. What Dr. Murthy and others recognize is that loneliness can lead to poor health. Health risks associated with social isolation and loneliness have been compared in some studies to the dangers of smoking, hypertension, or obesity. Factors that may lead to loneliness are divorce, moving to a new place, or the death of a spouse, partner, or friends. There are also sometimes internal factors, such as low self-esteem, poor confidence in making friends, and psychological issues that prevent people from socializing. People who are lonely also generally tend to have lower incomes and lower education and are less likely to have been married in the first place. We can imagine that loneliness has an impact on the health outcomes of older adults because good health as we age depends on maintaining relationships and support networks of friends and family. These networks are critical in improving our physical health and in maintaining our independence. In the absence of these connections, studies have shown that adults get less exercise, they have a diet that's higher in fat, and they have poor sleep, which promotes fatigue and less activity. These factors in turn lead to hypertension and elevated cholesterol. And as a result, several studies have shown that loneliness has an increased risk, is an increased risk for heart disease, stroke, and can lead to increased mortality. In this way, loneliness can cause an impaired quality of life in adults, and it is a predictor of functional decline, because as we can imagine, a spouse, a partner, or a roommate can be a good influence in encouraging a healthy diet, helping with exercise, and promoting preventative care. And in some cases, social isolation, loneliness, and poor social skills can lead to more destructive behaviors, such as smoking, alcoholism, and gambling. Over time, such lifestyles make supporting healthy connections less likely and can lead to more toxic behaviors, such as addictions, violence, overdoses, or even suicide. Often people develop issues related to depression or anxiety, and they may have to deal with these challenges alone because they don't have the good support networks. In addition, studies have looked at the effects of loneliness on cognitive function and memory. The best study I found to clarify this issue is a review and a meta-analysis done at the University of Cambridge in the UK and published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in 2019. The study did find that larger social networks and engagement in social activity are associated with better cognitive function later in life, but the association was small. Lastly, I do want to talk a little bit about technology. So the question is, does technology hurt or help loneliness and social isolation? And it appears that the paradox of the modern digital age is that technology such as social media helps in making connections, but does not relieve loneliness. Over the last decade, social media use has tripled among midlife and older adults, from 13% to 42% now. But it seems that just staying in touch does not provide the meaningful connections that we need. In fact, it can be especially dangerous when people retreat into an online world, and that may increase loneliness by limiting the time people have for more meaningful social connections. The key, it seems, to building a people-centered life is through service, volunteerism, social clubs, and other activities. These are the foundations of good emotional health. So when it comes to loneliness, community is the medicine, not your computer. In summary, although social science is difficult to study scientifically because there's so many variables, we do have convincing evidence that loneliness can lead to poor cardiovascular health because it encourages a more sedentary lifestyle, and it may even have a small effect on cognitive function later in life. Technology does not seem to be the answer, but social connections are. And with that, I will now turn it over to Bob Pacl. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Sunita. You raised a number of issues that I'm going to drill down a little further on. Could I have the next slide? I'd like to first introduce, where I'm coming from working in the hospital. I'm a geriatric social worker, and my focus is working with elders, typically because they are at higher risk of readmission to the hospital. And one of the areas of focus is social isolation. And we've all been talking about how social isolation is a very unhealthy state. So it's clearly part of my mission to address
the things that are driving poor health. Probably a slightly different take on what loneliness is. Both Katharine and Sunita have talked about it's not just about being alone. It's really more about what you think about the level of your social connection. Do you have enough? What's missing? What are the relationships you have like? And so it's very much out of perception, and it's quite variable across people. Sunita mentioned a study that said 43% of elders, this was very recent, just before the pandemic, it's probably higher now, 43% of elders report feeling lonely, yet only in that same study, only 18% lived alone. So it's clearly not about the amount of time one spends alone. It's about what one feels about the level of their social connection. Could I have the next slide, please? So we've all talked about some of the causes of social isolation and loneliness. Let me try to pick out a few that we haven't talked about. For elders, social disconnection naturally happens as people they care about move away or die. And so there's grief and there's disconnection that is really part of the lifespan. We talked about grief. A lot of elders have chronic health conditions or depression or failing memory. And you know, those are conditions that people talk about just not feeling up to making the effort to socialize because they're feeling too poorly, or perhaps they're feeling embarrassed by their condition. Loss of hearing is a big factor. I've talked with many elders who talk about the difficulty of going into social situations with multiple sources of sound where they can't distinguish individual voices, and they're just totally lost in the social context. Fear of falling, lack of transportation, financial challenges, those are all big barriers. Think about one of the most difficult things an elder may confront in life, and that is loss of transportation, you know, taking away of the license. That's huge, not only for practical purposes of getting to the grocery store, but for emotional purposes of being emotionally and socially connected to people. Next slide, please. We talked about some of these items, and the real takeaway here is that there are many mental health challenges associated with loneliness. Social connectedness is really necessary for our good mental health. I want to focus on one of them, depression. It's probably, of all the mental health conditions referenced here in this slide, it's probably the most well-researched in terms of its causal. It's both a cause of loneliness and it's also an effect of loneliness. And the thing I want to point out is that depression is very much a factor in poor health management. If you're depressed, you're likely not taking your medications as prescribed. You're likely not going to your doctor as needed. So it's many of these conditions are very much a factor in our poor physical health as well. Next slide, please. In my practice, I've probably asked about 2,000 elders what they think is vital to having a good life. Katharine, I have to have your energy level and write a book on my interviews because I just haven't gotten to it. But 90% of the people who I ask that question to say social connectedness is vital to having a good life. It's without a doubt the number one building block of a successful life that people talk about. And then in my practice, when I invite people to do life improving work, 50% of my patients choose social connection building as what they would want to work on. So clearly, social connection is vital. People believe it is vital, and if you frame a conversation that way, those are the kinds of responses you'll get. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give a snapshot of the kind of work I do with people when I run across an individual who identifies social connection as a major problem for themselves that they'd like to work on. And again, most people will choose social connection if asked what to begin working on. What I do generally in the beginning is work with the patient to do some brainstorming about actions or what they could do to make their lives more socially connected. And there's a few do's in how to define good actions that are productive for people. First, I ask people to create a list of possible actions that would be meaningful in achieving that goal. Really a typical example that I hear a lot in general, but especially now during the pandemic, is, for example, I'd like to be closer to my family. Katharine talked about some of the lonely people she worked with that were specifically noting their families. So a good productive action might be an example, I want to be closer to my family. The next principle I tend to work with is to make an action plan that's very specific and make it achievable. It's got to be specific so that there's well-documented menu for the patient as to what to do, and making it achievable is really important in terms of creating some success that is useful to building skills and building activity for the patient on an ongoing basis. So an example in that closer to the family might be something like in a pandemic time, sending a text or email to a granddaughter once a week or whatever follow-up is natural. That's clearly very well-defined and very achievable. The third principle is identifying barriers. What could go in the way? And going with my example of staying closer to that grandchild and family might be to really act to increase the probability that the interaction will be enjoyable. Maybe identifying areas of common interest where both could contribute. If your granddaughter's interested in horses, ask her questions about aspects of horses that she has knowledge and interest in. Plan horse-related activities you might do together in the future when the pandemic is over. But eliminate barriers, which might be lack of a successful interaction, is kind of key. And finally, we want to celebrate success. Being a socially connected individual isn't about one interaction with one granddaughter. It's really about being sensitive to what the individual's needs are and taking many actions to create a better, higher quality life. Could I have the next slide, please? I think there's one more. Yes, so these are some, I want to just briefly give you some pandemic specific ideas of what works in a pandemic setting when people are trying to work on their social connection. Use phone and social media. Now, Sunita said this isn't a panacea, but nonetheless, it is connection, and it's certainly better than nothing. And I, for one, I'm bombarding everybody I know with pictures of my household projects. Some might find them interesting, some don't, but I feel the need to do it, and I get enough back that, you know, it's working for me. Renew lapsed relationships. We all have had people who have drifted away for no good reason. That's a good target for reconnecting in whatever way you can, and you know, sort of adding to your connectedness. Find a creative project to do virtually. You know, there may be a family member who wants to do a genealogy project, or maybe to develop a family cookbook. You might have a grandchild who has projects that you have personal history you can contribute to for their academic work. Find something creative to do. Do something new with someone you live with. You know, TV is not the answer here. We've all been Netflix binging. We don't need any more Netflix binging. Read a book together. Do a puzzle together. I heard a great story of a man who you know, a very high-powered executive who was in between positions, and he's been doing some of the world's most difficult puzzles with his wife, almost obsessively. Social activities on the internet. If you like to play bridge, guess what? You can play bridge on the internet. You can actually meet people. They're not going to be the most developed relationships on the planet, but you'll be with people doing something you all enjoy. Volunteering. I've heard, even though the councils on aging are closed down, there's the potential to do telephone calls to make connections to other lonely elders. And it's really two birds with one stone, because you're both socially connecting. So there's still volunteer opportunities even in the times of a pandemic. And the last one I just get a kick out of, I don't know, we have a Dunkin' Donuts not too far away. And every time I drive by, I notice that there are people tailgating at a Dunkin' Donuts. They're socially distant. They're at least 10 feet away, sitting on their bumpers, having a cup of coffee, talking. So it's a responsible way to be socially connected. So those are some ideas for how we can address social connectedness. I'd like to have Kelsey talk a bit about what our hospital is doing in the community now. Kelsey?
Awesome. Hi, my name is Kelsey Magnuson, and I'm the Community Benefits Coordinator here at Emerson. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk here tonight about some of the different ways Emerson is working in the community to address social isolation and the overall health of the aging population. So you can go to the next slide. Emerson's mission is grounded in caring for the community at all levels. Emerson is committed to collaborating with our community partners to improve the health status of all those it serves, address root causes of health disparities, and educate the community in prevention and self-care strategies. So you can go to the next slide. I like to start by reminding everyone of the hospital's mission, because it is a key part of the guiding force of our community benefits program, which I'm going to talk a lot about tonight. And creating strong partnerships and giving back to the community is vital to improving the health of our community. And additionally, as a nonprofit hospital, we are required by federal and state mandates through the IRS and the Attorney General of Massachusetts to show how we are making an impact of the community's health. And we take that opportunity to create strong partnerships with lots of different organizations and stakeholders in our community. So next slide, please. So community benefits starts with a community health needs assessment to go through and identify health priorities to address. And that's kind of the foundation of the program. So on the slide, you'll see our top priorities, which include transportation, the growing aging population, at-risk youth, mental health, domestic violence, and cancer. And additionally, we have an understanding of the underlying social determinants of health, which are factors like the built environment or the living space that we have, things like access to food, open space, our social environment. So we've been talking a lot about that tonight, and the opportunities that people have in the community to be social with others. Housing, violence, education, and employment are all factors of health. We look at those as well. And I've highlighted transportation and the growing aging population because we're going to focus mostly on those two areas tonight. So we can go to the next slide. So what actually counts as community benefits? It's any activity or program that's unreimbursed and addresses our identified priorities. Programs, initiatives, and community funding developed in collaboration with community representatives are all considered community benefits. So things like our Health and Wellness Expo in the past, maybe you've come to, or sunscreen programs that we've started to do. And I'm going to go through a few other examples too. Those are all part of our community benefits program. And we can also report on our net charity care or any unreimbursed care within the hospital. That's counted as community benefit as well. So next slide. In the past few years, we've been focusing on building relationships with key stakeholders in our service area. And we've focused on addressing specific partnerships with transportation providers and partnering with towns to look at what the transportation options are and to see how Emerson can leverage our resources and support to increase transportation options. And we've also created a community benefits award program, which I'm going to talk about. So next slide. So some of the key partnerships that we have kind of been talking about a little bit tonight is Minuteman Senior Services, and we are making sure that we're connecting our patients to community services and looking at how we can partner together to provide community education and programming. Our Council on Agings in all of our towns, we work with to partner on communication, understanding the needs of the community, and working together to provide programming and services. We've been working with Tandem Care Associates and Care Dimensions those are key partners in addressing dementia and the caregiver population through our care management department and throughout the hospital. We focused on educating the community and staff on how to identify and care for people with dementia, and also we understand the great stress caring for a loved one with dementia is, and have worked hard to make sure that we're caring for the caregiver and providing resources to them. Crosstown Connect is a key transportation provider that we have really been working with over the last year or so. And the Magic subregion is a collaborative of towns managed by Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And it's a regional planning collaboration with towns in our primary service area. And some of their priorities include the regional plan to create age-friendly communities, which was mentioned earlier, and they've been focusing on housing and transportation. So those directly align with our priorities, and working with them has been a way for Emerson to understand these issues, understand what's going on in the community, and help support the current efforts going on. And Making the Connections is kind of a part of the MAGIC group, and it's a regional collaboration between towns looking at increasing transportation by funding TNC or Uber and Lyft options for residents in their communities. And each of these stakeholder partnerships helps us understand the needs and the current resources. And through meetings and programming, we can work together to address the needs and fulfill all of our missions. Next slide, please. So if we take a closer look at transportation and what we're doing with them, Crosstown Connect, like I said, is our big partner, and they provide commuter transportation to and from commuter rail stations during high peak traffic time, so the morning and the evening hours. And then during the day, they provide on-demand transportation to grocery stores, council on aging rides, healthcare rides, even social rides. And all of the options through Crosstown Connect are low cost and available to different towns. So the best way to understand their resources is to check out their website or call their dispatch service and ask if you are eligible to access their rides. And we've also been working with them specifically on pilots for healthcare transportation. So to get people to appointments, as we know, this is a big barrier in our area, and those are kind of on pause right now because of COVID-19, but we hope to pick that back up when life gets a little bit more normal. And then most town COAs, Council on Aging, have a van service that provides transportation options for their communities. And each has different stipulations and hours. So I just encourage everyone to call their local senior center to see what their transportation offerings are, and not only for transportation, but also for programming and what other services they can provide. So next slide. So I want to talk about our Community Benefit Award Program. We started this in the fall of 2019 to create a streamlined way to fund community organizations that align with our priorities. And we accepted applications from a wide range of partners addressing each of our priorities. Each organization was allowed to apply for up to $5,000. And we awarded a total of $55,000, and that was all given out in January of 2020. If we go to the next slide, we'll see this is a highlighted list of people who received funds from our award program. So Littleton Elder and Human Services was awarded funds to provide dementia care and caregiver stress reduction programs. Westford Council on Aging was awarded to increase transportation options and provide an aging mastery program, which is an educational program looking at lots of different health aspects and life topics that affect older adults. Minuteman Senior Services was awarded to offer healthy living workshops for caregivers and adults with chronic conditions. And we awarded the Reuben Hoare Library Building Project to provide a safe space for people of all ages to engage in learning, programming, and socialization. I want to highlight that libraries are a great resource for people of all ages, but older adults to go and to attend different classes that they might have, or even just sit and read the newspaper in a public location. Open Table, we awarded for supporting their senior program, which provides meals and groceries to older adults. This was a key aspect during all of COVID-19 and being able to continue to provide food for the older adult population. And lastly, the Virginia Thurston Healing Garden, we provided funding to support services for those with cancer. And some of these projects are on pause right now due to COVID-19, but they're all clear examples of the partnerships and support we provide to the community. COVID-19 has definitely stretched everyone in unimaginable ways, but it's been great to see how different organizations have adapted, and we've talked a little bit about how to socialize during a pandemic, and lots of these organizations and many more have been able to shift to online programming or Zoom classes, and even if we look at or think about telemedicine, has become such a big platform for healthcare as it continues to break down barriers. As we've been talking about, transportation is a huge barrier for older adults who might not drive anymore, but now telemedicine is a way to jump over that barrier. And Emerson is committed to working with many organizations to be innovative during COVID-19 and on an ongoing basis to address issues and support the community. So with that, I will thank everyone for having me speak tonight, and I'll give it back to Christine to handle questions and answers.
Thank you to all of our panelists. I think that you all brought a really unique perspective to the issue of loneliness, and it is a big topic to grapple with. Right now, I'd like to invite all of our audience to submit any questions that you have. We do have some. And again, what you would want to do is click on the Q&A feature on your screen and type in your question. We'll receive it, and then what I can do is speak the question and one of our panelists will answer. So what I'll do is ask all of our panelists to unmute themselves so that they're prepared to answer any questions. And we'll just sort of dive right in and tackle a few. This one is for Katharine Esty. Have you seen non-joiners become joiners, i.e. connected to a community in old age? Can personality change this much once a person has been isolated and disconnected for a long time?
Well, that's a good question, because that raises the really question, fundamental question, because can we change? And you can argue it both ways, but I have seen people change, and I do think, especially as they get older, that I think they have developed some survival skills, because they do all have losses. I mean, I think what happens is that people, as you get older, especially if by the time you're 80, half the people, their friends have died. And so everybody's learned how to cope with losses. And I think that they develop some new adaptations. And I see that particularly, I live in Newbury Court, and what people are so amazed at is they make new friends. Now that's in a retirement community. But I think, and people are just so amazed. I said, I never thought I'd make a new friend, and I have a new, and they do, almost everybody makes a new friend. And so I do think people can change and become, if they have the opportunity, but I think on their own, I do think that's why I said they're hidden in our midst, because I think the trick is, how do we find these people and engage them and lead them into a social situation that they might really enjoy. It will take some, because if you have a program and say we're going to have, bridge and croquet and even cooking lessons, the lonely person is probably not going to take the initiative. So we have to make some connections, build bridges, I think. But I do think people can change. And especially, I found in my book that people in their 80s many of them said they were happier than they had ever been in their lives. And I think it's because they do come to value being alive. And they, even with their limitations, and young people, even some of you on this panel, the younger people, when you look at somebody like my client, the first one, Orca, with macrodegeneration, 2 strokes, on a walker, you'd think, oh, if I was ever that, I'd say, shoot me. But people adapt, and they develop a kind of a sense of the pleasure of just being alive.
Thanks, Katharine. Let's see, we have another question. And this has not been directed to anybody. So for anybody who'd like to answer this, please chime in. Maybe Bob, this might be a good one for you. How do we help those who have barriers with technology? It's a tough question. Some of our elder clients are not able to work well with a cell phone or a computer.
Yeah, that is a good question, because I mean, it's clearly a tool. And it's not just elders. I mean, I've had many 40, 50 somethings who, you know, really beyond a telephone couldn't do much. One of the things that I'd point out is that the councils on aging, when there isn't a pandemic on, many of them have technology adult education, where volunteers come in and teach elders in the area skills. And you know, it's a little harder in a pandemic to try to address things like that, but you know, clearly there's some upside potential to skill up, but it is a challenge without a doubt.
Thank you. I have, this is more a comment, but I feel like maybe you might want to expand upon it. The comment is, Katharine's question of how do we combat loneliness is even so much more difficult with this pandemic. She was right on. Sunita was great, and Bob, you hit it right on the head about not feeling up to socializing. Does anybody have any comments to add to that?
Well, one thing I would say, it's about motivation. A lot of people have given up. You know, it's difficult, and the benefits of making the effort may not be apparent. So clinically, one of the things I'll attempt to do is remind people, you know, what really made life great once, and sort of build some motivation up to work on that again. And again, in some of the principles I mentioned earlier, keep it simple. You know, do something simple, like, you know, a conversation once a week with a granddaughter is a good start. It doesn't have to be, you know, join a group at a council on aging, which may be a very formidable step to take. Take a smaller step and work on the problem sequentially.
I might just add too that I think as a therapist myself, people sometimes think that when you're old, of course you're depressed, and they get confused and they think, well, that's, you know, it's because I'm old, when it really is they're depressed. So I think to be careful and sort of having the expectation that if you feel kind of down and out and blue and are crying, you know, often, that it's important for everybody around a person like that, family or therapists or people in there, to tell them, no, you need to get to the doctor, and that there may be medicine that can really help you. And I think we've accepted, you know, that isolation and thought it was normal, but it isn't. And normal is in spite of the health conditions and terrible chronic conditions. I see it around me. People, you know, thrive if their mental health is good. So I think that that's really key.
Yeah, there are certainly medications available for depression. There's a lot of stigma around, you know, accepting that it could be anxiety, depression that people suffer from. I think people would rather have something medical. They'd rather, you know, have it be thyroid or something else. There's still in the generation we're talking about, there's a lot of stigma about, you know, taking medication. But you know, there are some very good medications with minimal side effects available for depression, and if that's the cause of the isolation and loneliness. And another thing I would say is, you know, just like Bob said, keep it very simple. You know, you don't need to be at a big party or have multiple friends. One or two people is all you might want to connect to, and that's enough to alleviate the loneliness. So even in a pandemic, you can take a walk with a friend or have coffee socially distanced. And, you know, just very low expectations. Once a week, twice a week, you might get out and see someone, and that's enough.
Great, thank you. I think we've answered all the questions that we have here. We have we have a few comments that somebody was pretty excited about the tailgating at Dunkin' Donuts idea. So we might have a run on parking spaces at Dunkin' Donuts in the future, Bob.
I'm excited.
I'm
I'm
gonna
excited.
send
Can I
them
join
over.
you?
I own no stock in Dunkin' Donuts, by the way.
All right, well, I wanted to thank our panelists and I wanted to thank our audience for joining us. And we do look forward to having you join another Emerson Hospital event in the future. I will add that the Auxiliary is an intergenerational organization, all volunteer, and there's something for everybody to do. It is a wonderful way to be connected. So I offer that out to you to get in touch with me if you're interested. emersonauxiliary@gmail.com. I hope everybody has a good night and stays well, and we'll see you soon.